I think mental illness touches more of us than we care to admit, be it directly and indirectly, be it ourselves or someone we know. I called this video Brainstorms because I felt if I simply called it mental illness, not as many would watch it. I may be wrong in that assumption. I hope I am. My experience with the subject makes the word brainstorms quite appropriate, for it can feel like that. Thoughts all swirling, thundering, hailing, and blowing around up there. An oversimplification of a complex issue, I know, but it does give the feel of what it can be like. I have watched close friends and myself cope with different degrees of depression. One manic depressive, a schizophrenic. My later life would bring me in contact with all manners of things people cope with day to day, as a crisis line operator and child welfare worker. The one incident that made it all too real was when my mother had a nervous breakdown. She was in her late 40s. That was my first experience with actually seeing the mind turn on itself. She had a lot on her plate. Her and Dad were retiring early, and she was in charge of all the financial and logistical aspects of the change. She had started menopause and was leaving her job for the first time in a decade or more. They had sold their house and were planning on living in a cabin that they had just spent 8 years building. They were hoping to be avid snowbirds driving their way to the desert of Arizona and basking in the sun there for 4 months of the year. Like I said, a lot on her plate. The few days leading up to her breakdown, she did seem scattered and caught up in all the little things. But it wasn't the first time, so I didn't really pay it no mind. Now, memory is a funny thing. For one, it's not terribly accurate most of the time. I believe what it gets more right is how we feel at a particular moment than the details of it, though some details we are unable to forget. This is what I remember. Fragments, really. I came home from school, and although Mum was supposed to be at work all day, her car was outside. As our home had sold, we were living with my grandma. The house was quiet when I walked in. Mum and Dad's bedroom door closed, no lights on. I remember knocking, peeking in. She bundled in the sheets of the bed, mumbling. Not sure she even knew I was there. Her words were everywhere, snippets of sentences. Her back was to me. She was doing something with her hands, but I could not see. When I quickly realized this woman in the bed was not the mother I knew, I backed out as quietly as I'd come in. Now, I don't remember if I waited for Dad to come home or called him. I just see him suddenly there and going in and coming out of that room over and over, his face looking so worried. She didn't want a doctor, but his expression said otherwise. At some point, she insisted I come into the room again. She still didn't want any lights on, still curled up in her bed. What little light of the day outside squeezed into the room was enough to see her face as she turned to me. She knew me, though her eyes were wild. She held a bundle of deposit slips that she had been scribbling on the backs of. That's what she had been doing that first time I had walked in. On the slips were all her thoughts, as if she couldn't scribble them down fast enough. She was convinced they were the answer to my writing career, the story that would send me to stardom. She had always been my biggest cheerleader, and this was her way of assuring my success. She had maybe 200 slips. I took them, kissed her, and left. It would take 4 male nurses to tie her down later. She would spend a week in the psych ward, all us kids visiting once, watching her return to normal, becoming the mother, wife, and woman she once was. I know the experience never left her, that she worried sometimes if it would return. It never did. Looking around that ward at those less fortunate than my mother, I couldn't help but be struck by how that must feel. To never get yourself back. To have to adjust to that. To maybe not even be aware of it. 1 in 3 of us suffer from it. 1 in 5 never get all themselves back. For those of you with people in your lives who live with this, hug them. Hold them dear. Help them all you can. If you are one of those with brainstorms in your head, as alone as you may feel at times, you never are. I kept those 200 deposit slips for a very long time. I started writing a play about a psych ward and all the patients there. Only got as far as the first act. I had taken Mom literally. I'm not so sure that is what she meant. Years later, she and I would only revisit that day once. A quiet morning, sipping coffee. And here my memory never fails me. She told me what she remembered about it all. Our experiences quite different. She spoke about how she was outside herself the whole time, looking down, wondering how she had come to this, but unable to stop it. I didn't know if I would ever get back. At times I didn't want to. She just said it like it was. No stigma, no judgment. That really is, after all, the best way.